Welcome back to the panel discussion, Cybersecurity Game Changer, Real-Time Stream Processing in Government, sponsored by TIBCO on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your moderator, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Ann Barron-DiCamillo, the Director of the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or U.S. CERT, at the Homeland Security Department, Jeff Wagner, the Director of IT Security for the Office of Personnel Management, and Mark Palmer, a Senior Vice President for Integration and Event Processing at TIBCO. We spent the first part of the show talking a lot about this big data analytics, cybersecurity integration that seems to be happening. But let's get into the one program that really is making this happen, the DHS CDM, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. Let me turn to Ann to start this one off, since DHS is running the program. I know it's not coming out of your office per se, but you guys are going to play a big role and are playing a big role. Talk about the relationship between CDM and big data or real-time data.
Sure. So CDM is actually a program that's run out of our sister organization from a program management perspective. And we see it as an ability to enable federal departments and agencies to identify network security issues, unauthorized or unmanaged hardware and software, and other vulnerabilities, including weak configurations, weak baseline settings, as well as potentially helping identify insider threats. As an operator, we're excited about the program because it's going to be a gap filler associated with the kind of data that we look at. Right now, we see the boundary information that's happening at the Einstein programs. So we're seeing net flow, we're seeing intrusion detection, types of activities, intrusion prevention, but we don't have the understanding of what's the makeup or consistency within the departments and agencies as far as what version of an operating system are they running. So what we'll do is we'll see an exploit that's actively being, or we'll see a vulnerability that's actively being exploited by an adversary, and we'll provide that information to our constituencies, but we don't know who's actually vulnerable to that, because a lot of times that information is within their network, and so it's not readily visible. With CDM, we'll be able to quickly identify, a vulnerability that's actively being exploited, and then which department and agency is actually going to be affected by that vulnerability, and help them prioritize the patch or the mitigation associated with that. Whereas in the past, it wasn't easy for the federal government to easily identify who was vulnerable and who needed to reallocate resources to that. So this is a huge win from an operator's perspective in helping us better identify in a more quick, timely manner the kinds of mitigations that need to go on certain systems. And I think just one additional thing, from the perspective that we see from incident response, right now there's 4 controls we're always preaching to the community about, if these 4 controls were implemented, about 80 to 90% of the incidents we respond to would be mitigated. And it's reducing administrative privileges, operating system patching, application patching, as well as whitelisting. CDM will help departments and agencies measure 3 of those. And so we're real excited about this capability because we hope that it will actually have an active impact against the incident response engagements that we're dealing with and help reduce that.
And in fact, just going back to your initial point about knowing who's impacted by which type of vulnerability, that happened just probably most recently in the last year. I want to call it, code red, but it wasn't. I know that the latest threat that came across that everyone had to fix. I know DHS Heartbleed. Okay. There you go. Code red was so old, right? Love Shock or whatever.
There's code red. There's there's code red. There's Heartbleed. There's Bash Bug. There's Shell Shock. There's Jazz Bug. Which one?
Jazz Bug. Right. I just want to pull them all together and make one big. Yes. But the idea here is that you guys kind of experience that at DHS by saying, okay, we know it's a problem, but who's this impacting?
Who's impacted? Who's affected? And it delays our ability to respond. And so having that information on hand will help, these scarce resources that we have to really pivot and identify those vulnerabilities as a priority effort. And it has the visibility at the right level to make sure that those resources are having the effect where they need to be.
So, Jeff, my obvious question would be to ask you, of those 4 controls, how many are implemented at OPM? But I won't put you on the spot, I promise, on that one. But talk a little bit about CDM. You're in the Group A or Group B, whatever. DHS is kind of 2B. So you're one of the first agency-wide implementations of CDM, and you already have a pretty robust effort around continuous diagnostics and mitigation. Talk about where CDM fits in for you guys.
So where CDM fits in for me in our shop, we're actually really excited about CDM. From our perspective, this is compliance reporting. This is their cyber scope that we've done manually for years. And for years, each agency's been able to report out their version or their idea of their compliance. And it can get tricky sometimes because a particular sentence from the compliance perspective can be viewed many different ways. CDM is going to be automation of your compliance reporting. And for me, I'm excited about it because it's an efficiency level for me. Now, if I'm sending this data to DHS to report on and manage and track, I don't have to, every 2 weeks, write up the reports, produce all the logs, produce all the pieces, and then send it, through Cyberscope and then go from each place. I have more time to focus on directly fighting a threat. The other thing I love about CDM is I have a very good relationship with USCERT and with DHS. I enjoy working with them quite a bit. We have a very good symbiotic relationship where we both work together and share information and share details. And multiple times, it's been very helpful for us to call DHS and call USCERT and say, hey, I'm seeing some sort of anomaly here. Am I losing my mind, or is this something that's real? And then they'll be like, no, it's kind of real. You might want to look at that. So it allows me to focus on things that are potential threats before they become a threat. And CDM allows us to federally baseline our IT systems and report on it in an automated manner. So instead of trying to do all this manually through paperwork and then try to, through spreadsheets, lay out where the federal government lays or sits from an IT perspective, CDM is going to be able to do it automatically, and we can post it out and see in real time, hey, these are our threats, these are the problems, and these are the places we need to focus on. I'm excited about CDM, and it's about time in the 21st century. So.
One follow-up comment on that is that I think a lot of folks are excited about getting rid of this 3D ring binders associated with reporting. It was always that it was a period of time, it was a slice of time kind of reporting, and the ability to be able to now see activity as it's happening, being reported in real time from departments and agencies, and get rid of the 3-ring binders is really an evolution change in how we address compliance. Which is the goal of the 3-ring binders, but was really not readily achieved.
I want to clarify something as well, because you use the word compliance. Sometimes compliance is a 4-letter word in the federal cyber world. If you remember the Federal Information Security Management Act, FISMA, before it got updated just recently, everyone said, well, it's just a compliance exercise, very, very negative. But from your perspective, Jeff, you're not using this as compliance as in, I got to do another check the box exercise. You're saying this is enabling me to say, yeah, I am meeting a certain baseline, a certain set of standards, and doing it, if you will, as you said, automatically, so you're not spending the time to go through. I mean, is that help me understand the compliance piece, because I don't want people to walk away thinking, oh, he's just checking the box.
Not to say we don't have to check boxes. I don't want to say, we always have to check boxes. It's the reality of working in the federal government and law and everything else. But for me, compliance is baselining, and from an IT security perspective, I have to know where I'm at before I know what to look for, what's bad, or anything else. If I don't know what exists or what's there, I have no way to respond to it. It's like a fireman showing up to a fire at a garage, and is there gas in the garage? What is inside the system that I'm about to save? So compliance to me isn't a 4-letter word. It's actually a baselining to understand what we have to deal with and where our threats are.
The CIOs I talk to consistently, and this is across all CIOs, all industries in the Silicon Valley, right? This is one of the most vibrant sources of investment and VC engagement and innovation in Silicon Valley. And the CIOs, I think, that have this, sort of a view on the compliance, risk management, and surveillance. They see it almost as the same thing, because it's really about mitigating your risk. Now, the compliance effort is to comply with certain standards, but if you start to do that in real time, then it actually becomes a business benefit and a proactive mechanism to do a better job, rather than something that you just have to do to check a box. So this is where the whole field of real-time analytics, predictive analytics, is the core underpinning technology shift that's going on there. Away from 3-ring binders. That's like a massive shift. And believe it or not, there are still some pretty advanced industries that are still using maybe the moral equivalent of 3-ring binders, like a static database, and they're kind of looking through and trying to do forensics on what already has happened. The trick is figuring out what's about to happen or what's happening now.
One of the pieces around figuring out what is happening now versus what has happened is not just the volume of data, which we've talked a little bit about, but this idea of how quickly the data is coming at you. Is CDM or continuous diagnostic mitigation, however program you want to call it, is there a piece of that helps you kind of sort through and deal with the speed and the volume? Mark, let me start with you.
I think this is a fundamental issue with fast data, why we talk about the difference between big data and fast data. Big data, of course, being at rest, fast data being data in motion. And the physics that are changing there are computational dynamics and technologies that are fundamentally designed for data in motion. So what does that mean? That means dealing with time as a first order thing. Right. I mean, when you look backwards in time, that's one thing. When you're looking forwards or now in time, you're needing to compute in real time sort of time windows when these things matter, right? Like, so, it actually is statistically significant in a lot of cases that somebody made contact with someone within a specific time window. And you can only figure that out in real time if you're constantly evaluating that time window. So that's just one simple example of the temporal element or the time-based element where you're applying analytics on the now and forward rather than backwards. And that's actually a hard computer science problem. You generally have to do that with in-memory technologies. You actually can't do a real-time system by storing stuff on disk. It takes too long. But even worse, I mean, if you could put them in a binder, it's even worse, right? But even just storing it to your disk, there's too much latency. So,
or even the data lake, as I think Jeff and one of you mentioned earlier on, that when you collect everything in a lake, then you start looking through the lake.
Right.
You eventually find the fish you're looking for, but
right. It's better to find the fish that you're interested in the stream before they enter the lake, and that's
forgets the lake. Yeah. Good analogy, Jeff. You were shaking your head from an OPM perspective as you guys deal with the volume and the speed of the data. How do you find that right balance to you don't get overwhelmed by either?
I think it's really important to look at fast data. I mean, you are looking at a 0 plus. When we do incident response, we do our timelines just from that point. It goes from the 0 for us is the date of discovery. We have the plus of the data that's currently flowing through the network, and then we have a concurrent pathway of negative and the big data at rest. We're going back historically to pull all those pieces together to see where in the anomaly things happen. And so I think as we look at IT security, it's not just one or the other. To me, it's a look at both. And you have to look at both on a consistent nature as you're reviewing things happening in real time, actual real time. You're bouncing it off what you know from the past to try to find that anomaly. And if you don't have an efficient way to do it, it's going to become very difficult.
Is this the way you described it, the plus, the minus, and today, it's easy to look at the minus, right? Historical data is always easy, the historical hindsight 2020. You're shaking your head no, tell me why.
Only if you have a baseline. If you don't have a baseline of what your historical data is, then you have no idea what you're looking at.
It doesn't look anomalous.
It doesn't look anomalous.
Because you have no idea what it was supposed to look like.
Exactly.
Normal, right.
But is it ever normal? Because, the rate of attacks that I'm hearing, I did a recent press conference with the Veterans Affairs Department. They talked about how they suffered more than 1 billion, not, I want to say attacks, but attempted attacks, malware.
Scanning,
those
kinds of things.
Yeah, so much.
There's scanning happen every day.
Right,
it's Thursday,
is
right?
Is there ever a normal scanning Thursday?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the new normal is that's part of your reality. And so then it's trying to figure out from all of those, 40 billion net flow records a day, how do you find that dirty needle in the stack of needles, right? And I think, from our perspective, sometimes, like Jeff was saying, there's an ability, different types of data you're going to look at with different levels of automation, depending on what it is. And I think when you're looking at net flow, that's where you're going to need a heavy amount of automation in order to look through. If you have that many a day and you're looking over a year, that you've got to have some pretty heavy analytical tools to be able to go through that kind of data and then find the results. But I think that we're seeing the value associated with that and where automation is going to be helpful, and then where you need that artisan ability to be able to finely tune and go through that a little bit more.
I think it's interesting to draw from other use cases because they're very specific in sort of commercial context this way. So like an example that I saw to illustrate, I think, this point that you're making is in the oil and gas industry, there's a lot of fast data or streaming data now coming from oil wells. And one of the big problems is how do you do predictive maintenance on those oil wells so you can make sure that they're running efficiently so you don't affect flow of oil. And we actually did an interesting, went through an interesting process with a customer there where it took months, and I was just meeting with our data scientist yesterday, and he said, you know what, we found an analytic that has 100% predictive success on whether or not an oil well is failing. And I'm like, wow, that is fantastic. And he's like, well, and we just totally automate that. So, that is one that, so there are certain dirty needles that are always dirty.
There's certain things you're just going to automate all the way through, from end to end. And then there's other aspects of the data sets that you're going to need to have that ability, which I think kind of gets back to where, where some of that data you want to have some eyes on and bring some perspectives that you can't automate.
Right. Now, unfortunately, the algorithm this guy found it was. So I said, "Oh, great! What is the algorithm?" Because I wanted to get into the math of it. And he said, "If the temperature of an oil rig goes up by more than 20% in any 15-minute window, it's going to have a problem." And I thought, well,
there's no math involved.
That's actually the most boring algorithm that you can find. But anyway, the point is that that's something that you can just look for, automate. If that happens, you schedule somebody, you get it done, and then the people that are actually going to, can really think about these problems can then be liberated, if you will, to look at the more complex conditions.
All right, that's a great example. Very simple, very straightforward. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Cybersecurity Game Changer, Real-Time Stream Processing in Government, sponsored by TIBCO, on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.